Section 5.1, Ratios. The term ratio means a comparison of two numbers or like quantities. Ratios can be written several different ways. One way to write a ratio is just in word form. So I could say the ratio of 9 to 13, which just means that I am comparing 9 to 13. Sometimes you might see it written a second way, 9 with a colon 13. And once again, that's read the same way, the ratio of 9 to 13. But sometimes it is written with a colon. Another way, and the way that we will use in this particular course, is when it's written as a fraction, 9 to 13, but it looks like a fraction. And as I say, in this course, we will generally be writing ratios, and they look like fractions. But the way to say it is still the ratio of 9 to 13. Let's look at this in a more practical way. I had said that a ratio is a comparison of two numbers. So I've drawn a rectangle here. You can see that the width is 7 inches and the length is 19 inches. So I could say, what is the ratio of the width to the length? So if I want the ratio of the width to the length, once again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this, and as I say, we are generally going to be writing this in fractions. So the width to the length, it would be 7 inches is the width to 19 inches is the length. Now, normally when we're writing, we do forget about the labels, and we just say that the ratio of the dimensions of this rectangle, width to length, is just 7 to 19, and we do forget about the labels. We could also, though, ask for what's the ratio of the length to the width. If I wanted the length to the width, then it would just be the opposite of that. Instead of 7 over 19, it would be 19 over 7. And I'm writing it as a ratio, so it is 19 to 7. Now, lots of times when we were doing math earlier with fractions, we would take a look at 19 over 7 and we would say, well, that's a top-heavy fraction. We don't want a top-heavy fraction. With ratios, we generally leave them in fraction form. So, because of that, we would just be giving 19 to 7. We would not be changing that to a mixed number. Let's look at another example. Here I have another rectangle with a width of 20 inches and a length of 30 inches. So, if the question is, what is the ratio of the width to the length, I would be putting it is 20 over 30. Now, once again, I did not put the inches in there because normally we don't do that. So the ratio is 20 to 30. But since it is a fraction, we do want to put that fraction in simplest form. So if I'm going to put this in simplest form, I can divide these both by 10. So I would say that the final answer, the ratio of the width to the length, is 2 to 3. When writing ratios, we try to use the same units when possible. And here's an example. What is the ratio of 60 seconds to 2 minutes? Well, in this particular case, instead of putting 60 over 2, I can easily convert one of those so they are the same. So instead, I could say it is 60 seconds to 120 seconds, which is the same as 2 minutes. So, if possible, make sure that the units that you are using are the same type of units. Now, if I have 60 to 120, if the ratio is 60 to 120, once again, I can divide this. I can put this into lower terms. So I would divide by 60 over 60, and I would say the ratio is a 1 to 2 ratio. Let's do another one. How about if I wanted to give the ratio of 4 nickels to 3 dimes? Well, once again, I could say 4 to 3, but I'm not really talking about the same unit. So I could change those into cents. So if I did that, 4 nickels would be 20 cents, 3 dimes would be 30 cents. And then once again, I could divide those by 10 over 10, and I would have a ratio of 2 to 3. Sometimes you can't have the same units though. A classroom has 7 men and 13 women. What is the ratio of men to women? So if I wanted to write it as a ratio, it would be 7 men, because I asked for the men first, 7 men to 13 women. Once again, I don't use the label part of it or the unit part of it, so I would just be writing it as is a ratio of 7 to 13. I just have to make sure that I answer the question in the same order it was asked. So if it's the ratio of men to women, it would be 7 to 13. If I ask the question the different way, what is the ratio of women to men, then I would need to be writing 13 over 7. Sometimes the ratios that you are asked for cannot immediately be put into simplest fraction form. Lori sank a 22.5-foot putt and Carrie sank a 30-foot putt. What is the ratio of Lori's putt to Carrie's putt? If I was going to write this, I would have to be writing 22.5 to 30. So I'm going to write it as a fraction 22.5 over 30. This is known as a complex fraction. A complex fraction is a fraction that is inside a fraction. And in this case, it's a mixed number that has that fraction. So I am going to have to get this to just a simple fraction form. Well, that 22 halves that I have, I could change that into an improper fraction by multiplying 2 times 22 is 44, plus 1 gives me 45. So the top part of my ratio is 45 halves. The bottom part is 30. And now I'm going to have to go through and make that into a simple fraction. So really what I have is I have 45 halves divided by 30 over 1. And remembering what we did in Math 1, as you go through and do that, I'm going to have to change that into a multiplication problem. I'm going to flip-flop the second number. So I have 45 halves times 1/30th, and then I'm going to use the idea of factoring the 30 and the 45. I can divide both of those by 15. If I divide by 15, I get 2 for the 30. And if I divide the 45 divide by 15, I get 3. And now I'm just going to multiply across. The 3 and the 1 gives me 3. The 2 and the 2 gives me 4. So the ratio of this is 3 to 4. Here's another example. The diameter of a 20-ounce bottle is 2.8 inches. The diameter of a 40-ounce bottle is 5.25 inches. What is the ratio of the diameter of the smaller bottle to the larger bottle? If I wanted to go through and do this, I would just put in the information that I have. I'm comparing the smaller diameter to the larger, so it would be 2.8 to 5.25. But once again, I can't have decimals as part of my fractions, so I need to do one of two different things. If I wanted to, I could rewrite both of these numbers as mixed numbers. Right now they are in decimal form. So 2.8 means 2 8/10, which is 2 8/10 written as a mixed number. 5.25 is 5 25/100 if I wanted to write it as a mixed number. Now I need to go through and I need to change, because that's a complex fraction, into just a regular fraction. Well, it would be easier to do that if I put both of those fractions into lowest terms. 8/10 would be the same thing as 4/5. So I'm going to change that to 2 4/5. 25/100, I could divide both the 25 and the 100 by 25. I get 5 1/4. It's a lot easier to deal with those with those fractions rather than the other fractions that I had, which are just much bigger numbers. Now I need to go through and change both of these into fraction form. So 2 and 4/5, if I'm going to change that into an improper fraction, 5 times 2 is 10, plus 4 gives me 14. This is 14/5. 5 and 1/4, I'm going to change. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 1 is 21. I get 21/4. So now I have a fraction divided by a fraction. So I'm going to go 14/5 divided by 21/4. But once again, I need to change that to a multiplication problem. It would be 14/5 multiplied by 4/21. Now I can factor out a 7 out of both the 14 and the 21. If I factor a 7 out of the 14, I'm left with 2. If I factor a 7 out of the 21, I'm left with 3. And now I can multiply straight across. 2 times 4 gives me 8. 5 times 3 gives me 15. So the ratio of this is 8 to 15. I had said that one way to solve that problem was to change everything into mixed numbers and then into fractions. But there is another way that you could have solved this as well. I'm going to rewrite this with what I started with, 2.8 to 5.25. If I wanted to, I could change both of those to whole numbers. In order to change the bottom number into a whole number, I would need to move the decimal point 2 spots over. Moving the decimal point 2 spots over means I need to multiply by 100. If I multiply the bottom by 100, I have to multiply the top by 100, which means I would move that decimal point over 2 spots. So 2.8 times 100 is 280. 5.25 times 100 is 525. Now I do have just a fraction, 280 to 525. The only problem with that is that it's not in simplest form. So now I would need to go through and put this in simplest form. And taking a look at that, I see that I can divide them both by 5 over 5 because they end in a 0 and a 5. If you go through and do the math, 280 divided by 5 gives me 56, and 525 divided by 5 gives me 105. Now I can go through and trying to find out whether or not that is in lowest terms or not. It actually is not. I can divide both of these by 7. 56 divided by 7 gives me 8. 105 divided by 7 gives me 15. Notice I get the same answer either way. The ratio is 8 to 15. It doesn't matter which way you go through and do it. Either one of those two ways will work. We will be doing a lot of work with ratios throughout the rest of this course, and this is just the beginning. If there is anything I can do to help in your understanding, please let me know.